Hello, everyone. This is Carolyn reading to you from the New Bedford Standard Times on Tuesday, January 21st. As always, we'll start today with the weather. Today we will see increasing clouds and it will be very cold. The highs will be just 24 degrees and the lows 11 degrees. Tomorrow, Wednesday, January 22nd, will also be a very cold day, but with decreasing clouds. The highs will be 23 degrees and the lows 14 degrees. Thursday will be partly sunny and not as cold. Highs of 34 degrees and lows of 20 degrees, Friday will be another day with plenty of sunshine and highs around 34 degrees, lows 15 degrees. And Saturday will also be a partly sunny day. Highs will be 31 degrees and lows 26 degrees. And next today, as always in other local news, we'll go to the lottery. For the numbers game, yesterday, Monday, January 20th, at the midday drawing, the numbers were 3, 8, 5, and 0. Again, 3, 8, 5, and 0. For the evening drawing, yesterday, Monday, January 20th, the numbers were 8, 9, 7, 8. Once again, 8, 9, 7, 8. The mass cash numbers for yesterday, Monday, January 20th, were 10, 16, 17, 18, 31. Powerball numbers, again for yesterday, Monday, January 20th, were 15, 16, 32, 47, 54, with a bonus ball of 6. Megabucks numbers for yesterday, January 20th, were 4, 8, 28, 32, 33, and 37. And finally, Lucky for Life numbers for yesterday, Monday, January 20th, 4, 8, 12, 22, 35, the lucky ball of 15. If you played any of these games, we wish you the best of luck. And now we'll go to our front page local news story. The first story is entitled, "A Busy Weekend for Mitchell at Mayor's Conference. New Bedford Mayor Speaks at Sessions on Climate, Hate, and Makes the Usual Round on Capitol Hill," by Grace Ferguson. It's one of the few places where you can turn several heads by just saying, "Hey, Mayor." More than 270 mayors from across the country descended on a Marriott in Washington, D.C. this past weekend for the annual winter meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. They held panels on topics ranging from clean energy to public safety to immigration policy. As mayors dined on sponsored lunches, the organization's leaders set their federal policy priorities for 2025. More than 700 city officials, subject matter experts, and business people registered to mingle with the mayors in color-coded lanyards. On the eve of President Donald Trump's inauguration, then-President Joe Biden and 2 officials from his cabinet addressed the conference. Mexico's ambassador to the U.S. answered immigration questions at a panel. New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell is a regular at these meetings. He recently went on 5 trips for the organization in a 1-year period. The Light reported in an analysis of his travels. Mayer sits on the organization's board of trustees. "I don't want to brag about it, but I actually think it's a big deal," he said in an interview with The Light in December. "You guys didn't report on it, but I think that could be something relevant to frankly report on." So The Light sent a reporter to D.C. to report on it. What Mitchell did in Washington. The New Bedford mayor was a leading voice on climate issues at this meeting. At the closing session on Sunday, Mitchell said mayors must lead the climate conversation. At a panel on clean energy tax credits, he spoke briefly about plans to use geothermal energy in the to-be-constructed Congdon-Devallis School. "The thing about geothermal is, it works," he said, "because it lasts long and lowers energy costs." In an interview, Mitchell said some of the most interesting things he heard at the conference were about climate. "It's been diminished as a political issue because some people are fatigued about hearing about it," he said. The mayor said he learned about better ways to message on climate by keeping messages relevant and fact-based and not coming across as a, quote, "smarty pants," unquote, about it. Mitchell spoke up at a panel on hate, where experts described a rise in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, far-right anti-immigrant sentiment, and violence on college campuses. The mayor told other attendees it's important to acknowledge the Jewish community's fears of violence. "When people are upset, you gotta show up and have their back," he said. He jokingly added, "I am a golem of New Bedford," liking himself to a servant creature in Jewish folklore. One of his recent trips was an expedition to Israel with other member mayors. Mitchell also attended a panel on gun violence. He said the panel topics were important, but the discussions didn't teach him much he didn't already know. "As time goes on, there are fewer best practices to internalize," he said. The mayor also said he also holds private meetings with other leaders at these conferences, which are often more important to him than the formal panels. He spoke to a Light reporter in the hallway just before one of these meetings. He declined to say with whom he would be speaking. If the conference had been held 2 weeks later, there might have been more to learn, Mitchell said. By then, there's likely to be more clarity on what cities can expect from President Trump and the new Congress in the coming years, he said. Without more information, mayors could only speculate at this meeting. Mitchell didn't spend the entire conference weekend in the windowless bowels of the Marriott Marquis. He said he also made the usual round on Capitol Hill with a visit to Senator Ed Markey on Friday. They talked about the planned closure of a federal building in downtown New Bedford, NOAA's future headquarters, offshore wind, fishing, and port infrastructure, Mitchell said. Also on Friday, Mitchell said he had a meeting with America 250 about ways New Bedford can participate in the country's 250th birthday next year. "I think people need to know that I spend my time here working very hard for New Bedford," Mitchell said on Friday. The mayor simultaneously managed affairs at home. On Saturday morning, he said he was remotely handling New Bedford's snowstorm prep and state pier matters. And later on Saturday, after the Biden administration lifted its suspension order on Vineyard Wind, Mitchell returned a call from the offshore wind company after finishing his conversation with a Light reporter. Other mayors in leadership positions praised Mitchell in brief interviews with the Light between conference sessions. The New Bedford mayor is very involved in the organization's internal governance, said Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt, the organization's vice president. John's a great guy, Holt said. Why mayors attend the conference. The U.S. Conference of Mayors is registered as a not-for-profit and describes itself as a bipartisan organization. It has hundreds of dues-paying member cities, New Bedford among them. Mitchell and other mayors say that a key reason why they attend these conferences is to learn from other mayors. Cities face similar challenges, many of them said. Mayors are trying to keep housing affordable, streets safe, and economies healthy. Chicopee Mayor John Vio said he tries to persuade other mayors to come to the conference because of how much they can learn. We don't invent wheels. We borrow them from other communities, he said. Vio spoke to a Light reporter after listening to the Clean Energy Tax Credit panel where Mitchell described New Bedford's geothermal school plans. Moments later, Vio struck up a conversation with Mitchell to see whether Chicopee might be able to use the same credit. Outside of conferences like this one, mayors have few opportunities to network with colleagues who share their job title. At a breakout session for new attendees, San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria likened the conference to group therapy. Holt, the Oklahoma City mayor, said the meeting gives his mental health a boost. The other important reasons mayors cited for attending. This organization serves as a unified voice for city governments at the federal level, which helps them lobby for resources. When we lock arms and we advocate in Washington, we've had some success, Holt said. As an example, Holt pointed to money allocated to cities in the bipartisan infrastructure law. Mayors said that package helped finance pedestrian improvements and other big projects. In New Bedford, it funded planning for the city's waterfront paths and lead pipe replacements. Mayors focused on their federal advocacy on the housing crisis at this gathering. It's the biggest challenge cities are facing, mayors said at a press conference. We don't talk nearly enough about our housing deficit, Gloria said. It is enormous. The organization's housing report showed that an overwhelming majority of the 120 mayors surveyed agreed that the crisis is severe, widespread, and worsening, and most said it will continue to worsen if Congress doesn't pass a significant housing production bill. Mayors said the cities are already taking action, but they need federal dollars. They called for flexible funding to be sent directly to cities, not through state legislatures. 9 in 10 surveyed mayors said this was extremely or very important. At the same time, mayors said the federal government must protect existing federal housing grants, vouchers, and tax credits. Most surveyed mayors said it was important to expand the programs too. Biden team visits. President Biden gave a brief speech to the conference at a lunchtime session on Friday. The organization awarded him with its highest honor, the Distinguished Public Service Award. Biden recapped his administration's accomplishments, including signing the American Rescue Plan Act and measures to reduce prescription drug prices. Attendees gave a standing ovation when the president announced that the Equal Rights Amendment is the law of the land. Critics say Biden's assertion is based on an incorrect legal interpretation of what it would take to ratify the proposed constitutional amendment. Earlier on Friday, then Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said the drivers of fulfillment, relationships, purpose, and service are missing from many Americans' lives. Hustle culture doesn't bring lasting fulfillment, and it's a driver of unhappiness, he said. It is up to us to rebuild the community in the country we love. Mayors have a special role to play here, Murthy said. He received a standing ovation as he finished speaking. Mayors showered the next speaker, then U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, with just as much, if not more, admiration. Mayor Pete was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, before he launched his 2020 presidential bid and landed in Biden's cabinet. Friday's speech would be his last public engagement as secretary, he said. Buttigieg's speech, like Biden's, was somewhat of a resume of the administration's accomplishments. The transportation secretary focused on federally funded infrastructure projects in cities. Today, every form of U.S. transportation is in better form than we got it, he said. But there's more work to be done, he added, and much will be up to mayors. Buttigieg called on mayors to unite their diverse and divided communities by building trust. The community of mayors is about to matter more than ever, he said. Praise for the work of mayors was not in short supply at the conference. Mayors get things done, and similar sentences were common refrains. We're killing it, Holt said at a press conference. He went on to call mayors the greatest class of political leadership this country has. Our next local story today is entitled, Biden Administration Approves South Coast Wind Construction Plan. South Coast Wind plans to use New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal and Foss Marine Terminal. This story is by Michael P. Norton. On the last business day of the Biden administration, a federal agency announced its approval of the construction and operations plan for South Coast Wind, a big offshore wind project that Massachusetts is counting on. We're proud to announce BOEM's final approval of the South Coast Wind project, the nation's 11th commercial-scale offshore wind energy project, which will power more than 840,000 homes. U.S. Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Director Elizabeth Klein said in a Friday statement. South Coast Wind plans to use the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal to stage the major turbine components, as Vineyard Wind has been doing, and the New Bedford Foss Marine Terminal for long-term project operations and maintenance. The developer's lease at the state-operated Commerce Terminal is not set to begin until 2029, a spokesman for the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center previously told The Light. Receiving today's final Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, approval keeps South Coast Wind on track to developing reliable domestic energy to New England's homes and businesses, said company CEO Michael Brown in a statement Friday. South Coast Wind will create thousands of union jobs over the life of the project and generate $3.8 million in new economic activity. In September, Massachusetts selected 1,087 megawatts of power from the 1,287 megawatts South Coast Wind project, with the remaining 200 megawatts going to Rhode Island. South Coast Wind will be located about 26 nautical miles south of Martha's Vineyard and 20 nautical miles south of Nantucket, an area where developers with federal leases are planning to set up major industrial operations. The approved project includes construction of up to 141 wind turbines, up to 5 substation platforms, and up to 8 offshore export cables located in corridors that could make landfall in Brayton Point or Falmouth. Owned by OW Ocean Winds, the South Coast Wind project was previously selected by Massachusetts, but the developer canceled the contract amid escalating costs. The developer has pledged to allocate $93 million to initiatives like local workforce development, fisheries and marine science research, environmental justice, and ratepayer support. Project officials estimate power could flow from the project onto the grid in 2030. Utility officials in Massachusetts this week notified state regulators that project contract negotiations with South Coast Wind and another offshore project did not lead to executed contracts by a January 15th deadline, and the execution of the contracts is now expected by March 31st. Representative Justin Thurber of Somerset told the Fall River Reporter on Friday that Italian company Prysmian Cable Manufacturing will not be building the offshore wind cable plant on Brayton Point. The company announced plans in connection with an ultimately unsuccessful wind farm bid to build a subsea transmission cable manufacturing plant on land in Somerset that last decade hosted a coal-burning power plant. State officials have for years celebrated Prysmian's commitment as a sign that offshore wind was gaining a foothold in the United States, and especially in Massachusetts. President-elect Donald Trump, an offshore wind opponent and fossil fuels power production advocate, will be sworn in on Monday and has forecast his own plans to put the squeeze on offshore wind energy. There's an ongoing debate over how the Trump administration might impact projects with permits versus those still in the pipeline. Our next local story today is entitled BOEM's Compensation Framework for Fishermen Ensures Consistency, but not legally binding. The plan promotes fair treatment of fishermen, but New Bedford Port Authority director said the document lacks the force and effect of law. This story is by Anastasia E. Lennon. The lead government regulator on offshore wind issued a long-awaited federal framework this week to guide wind developers on how they should mitigate impacts and compensate the fishing industry for any loss incurred due to the turbine arrays. It includes recommendations on claims processes, fisheries communication programs, and cable burial, and an appendix of complex formulas to calculate compensation, much of what developers have already been doing, albeit in various ways. The document is not legally binding and has been in the works for several years, with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management issuing draft guidelines in 2022. BOEM states its new guidance ensures consistency and promotes fair treatment of fishermen, regardless of their home or landing port. This guidance focuses on transparency and early engagement with fishing communities and effective strategies to mitigate potential disruptions, said Brian Hooker, a BOEM lead biologist who led much of the effort. Through this initiative, BOEM is working to decrease the impacts of offshore wind projects on commercial and recreational fisheries and ensure fair treatment for all fishermen. Stakeholders have frequently criticized the inconsistency among wind projects in addressing impacts to fisheries. BOEM lacks authority to create or manage a fund to compensate fishermen for offshore wind, and has stated such an ability would require congressional action, which hasn't happened despite some early steps. The federal government has largely left the issue of compensation to developers, and as such, it has been decided on a project-by-project and state-by-state basis that, quote, has resulted in inconsistencies in estimating impacts to fisheries, end quote, state officials told BOEM years ago. In response, 11 states have been developing a regional fund to resolve possible inequities. This fall, they hired a third-party administrator, which BOEM recommends in its guidance, to design the funding program with oversight from a board of fishermen and wind industry representatives. This has been Carolyn reading to you from the New Bedford Standard Times on Tuesday, January 21st. I hope you all have a wonderful day.